and leading up to and encompassing the War of 1812, or as some call it, the Second War of Independence, or the Second War with Britain. And this time period is going to be critical because what we see are a couple of things. We're going to talk about one gentleman who is considered the father of modern warfare, and he actually invented what you're going to hear me discuss a lot as combined arms warfare. We're also going to talk a lot about the struggle and strife that still exists even today to some extent, very, very minor today, but about the differences between, do we want a large standing army or do we want to rely on that smaller militia force that we saw come out. We saw the foundations of this begin in the American Revolution, but this is still a struggle through this particular time period. And again, even in our country today, there's still a little bit of this influence. So we're going to talk about a few things. Start with just a picture here. So General Washington accepts a surrender, 1781. So is the war over? That's the question at hand here. Is the mission accomplished? The war's certainly over, but the mission may not be accomplished yet. We really just started on this journey of becoming a free nation, and now how does our military grow and build to support this nation? So quick look at our boundaries here. As we see out of the Treaty of Paris 1783, the American Revolution has ended now. So let's look at the United States. These are all Spanish possessions. We're going to talk a little bit about the Lewis and Clark expedition today, and that's going to be one of your readings as well. So, and we are going to focus on this area right here. And when I talk about westward expansion, I want you to particularly think about the fact that the majority of our population is currently, at this time in American history, the majority of the population's right up through here on the East Coast. Some southward expansion, a little bit of westward expansion, but the Appalachian Mountain Range right through here has proved somewhat formidable, and this area is just now really being explored. It's not without inhabitants, it's not without population, but it is very, very sparse, and it is very much the western frontier. So just a few things we'll talk about here. Some land threats. We see that Britain still has some influence up here with its possessions. The British Navy is the most formidable navy in the world at this particular point in history. Our geography, again, this westward expansion is just now happening. The Appalachian Mountains are just beginning to be pushed through and explored. The economy, heavily reliant upon trade with Britain through this time period, particularly from these northeastern merchants through here. And we're still coming from that colonial heritage. We still are a nation very much in tune with the fact that we came here from Britain. We were trying to escape the king's rule and trying to get out from underneath the thumb of that military rule. So we are very, very resistant to that thought process of a large standing army that could come in and take control. So the country is expanding on its own. So this land up in here, as you can see almost by the map and the way it's starting to build out, let me move myself a little bit for you. You can almost see that this land is just not as populous, and in fact some of it was even seeded even a little bit later than the others were. So by and large, the population right up through here. The blue stars are going to denote frontier forts, and so that's kind of your western frontier right through there. The brown stars are going to be coastal fortifications. Something that's critical to think about, see all these coastal fortifications even up in the rivers here in New York, all along the seaboard. Something that's critical to remember here is some of these were inherited from the British once we won the War of Independence, so now we have a staffing problem. So the American military, as it tries to figure out how to expand and protect this nation and ready us for future wars, we have to think about how we're going to man those forts we've now inherited, because they're there. If we don't occupy them, if we don't try to do something with them, then they are subject to being occupied by any invading force that wants to come in and make that a stronghold. So we have to occupy it or destroy it. We need to do something with it. All right, so George Washington, respectable general and president at this time, he had these sentiments. He wanted a small regular army that was full-time professional fighting force. He wanted them to be ready to defend our nation at a moment's notice, ready to go almost instantly. He wanted a respectable and well-established militia, meaning he wanted that militia force, those colonial fighting men, the Minutemen of the Revolutionary War. He wanted them to be pretty well trained, well established. He wanted them to be funded. He wanted them to be trained, and he wanted them to be ready to stand up as a follow-on force to the regular army. Again, something we see in our country today with the National Guard. That is that evolution of the militia. So today we have that large regular army, standing army, as well as the National Guard, or that well-established militia. He proposed arsenals that would be stationed throughout the United States to warehouse munitions, supplies, and ready to equip that small regular army when it sprung into action. Also, and this is something that is critical to today. He proposed the military academies to train that new generation of professional leaders coming up. So he saw that combination as being critical to our growth, as our future. Just a couple of things we'll point out here. The Department of War was established in 1789. Actually, what's significant about that? That is our nation actually saying there is a need for this, that we may need to go to war. We need to actually have a government entity able to handle that, to regulate that, and to deal with that when it comes time. Prior to that, really the politicians, the leadership in Washington had handled it in that stead, but now we're actually standing up a Department of War to actually do that for us, to be in charge of our wartime issues. The Second Amendment was ratified in 1791, and that is the amendment that basically guarantees the militia. That is our constitutional amendment that says our militia will always be armed. They always have the right to keep and bear arms. And a quartermaster, even in peacetime, before the quartermaster was an article of war, the quartermaster would be stood up, and the quartermaster is where your supplies, your warehouses, your stores come from. So that quartermaster is going to be stood up and is going to run those armories, those arsenals we just talked about. So now we have, even in peacetime, we have a militia that is promised to be able to equip itself and arm itself. And we have a department, a government agency that's going to handle and run those combat operations, as well as a quartermaster that's there to help get them on the road, get them going. These are things that today's military or today's forces take for granted. However, they were just building it out. They were, if you remember a slide from previous classes, we're building this airplane in flight, so to speak. So they're getting this built out. They're figuring it out as they go. Relations weren't great between the civilian population and the military. There were some issues. Many of the officers that served in the Revolution had not been paid. There was some back pay owed. There was some threats made there, and the government had a bit of an uprising on its hand. It was able to kind of push it aside a little bit and deal with that and move past it. But it was of consideration. It was concerned. All right, Newburgh's Conspiracy, Society of Cincinnati. Those are things you can read about a little bit more if you wanted to. The Shays' Rebellion of 1786. I'll move myself for a second so you can see that. And the Constitutional Convention of 1787 is where a lot of these things were hashed out. So they dealt with a lot of these problems and did a good job of moving past it. So, okay, so a couple of things to think about is we had the Nationalists, or the Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists. And basically they lined themselves onto two different sides of the coin. One wanted a stronger federal government that was highly regulatory, strong relationship with Great Britain, continue that trade relationship. The Anti-Federalists did not. They wanted a smaller federal government, more states' rights, and they wanted the militia left to defend our country more than that large standing army. We still see some of these elements in today's society, and we kind of see how they both kind of line up on both sides of the coin, so to speak, there. So you kind of had the the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So remember, as we talk about that debate between a large standing army or militia, you're kind of getting that between the two there. So constitutional base, we talked about that a little bit. I would encourage everyone, if you haven't done it, to read at least the amendments to the Constitution. I think that every American needs to read the Constitution itself. But the Second Amendment right there is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that's where that comes from. Second Amendment. General Henry Knox, I'm going to drop this. You can see a YouTube link kind of covered up in the corner there. I'm going to drop a link to him that you can watch a short YouTube short about. But something to think about him is he was the first staff officer. He was the first person from Lincoln's staff that was brought, or excuse me, Washington's staff that was brought in during the Revolution. And he was there as an advisor. Today, a general, officers of every level almost have a staff. But at that point in time, it was really just the boss making all the decisions. He brought in Henry Knox as chief of artillery, and when they went to battle, he would then take Knox's advisement on where to place and how to utilize the artillery. One of the first staff officers we see. He's critical to our nation's founding, our early military days, and I am partial to him being an artillery officer myself. He was, one thing that the video will talk about a little bit is he kind of grew up in the shadows of General Washington, so he was right next to the greatness of General Washington, which meant that his own achievements were overshadowed a little bit. So history doesn't really recognize him to the level that maybe it would if he were not in the shadows of General Washington. Very, very capable, competent man. Just know when you see his name or read about him that he's overshadowed a little bit by General Washington, and rightfully so. General Washington was a great leader. So another man we'll talk about a little bit, again, this link is hidden, but I'll drop it in your class notes for the week, is Mad Anthony Wayne. And he's considered the father of the regular army, and he really came up with this concept of combined arms warfare, where infantry was the main fighting force, supported by artillery and supplemented by cavalry to use as need be. He wanted independent units that could be sent out. We've seen different variations of this throughout the Marine Corps and the Army with brigade combat teams and expeditionary units, self-contained units that could go out and fight on their own without support across the Army so much. Again, he's considered the father of the regular Army. Combined arms warfare is something that you hear me emphasize a lot, and he's the one who really began that and gave us that concept. Again, some more talk about the militia. Let's look at naval sizes real quick going into this time period. British Navy, 145 ships. French, 73. Spanish, 72. Dutch Navy, 48. And U.S., I'm covering that up, but we had none. There was 0 ships in the U.S. Navy. And so you can kind of see what we were dealing with there. So let's talk about, as we get towards 1812, let's look about the road to war with Great Britain. So the French Revolution began in 1789. Jay Treaty, 1795, and we start dealing with the late 1790s, the quasi-war and XYZ affair. And basically what you had there is you had a quasi-war. You had merchants fighting a war on the open seas, and as part of that, American merchants were being captured and overtaken and basically indentured or enslaved by the British government. So that comes up to play in a little bit, but those merchants were being taken. Britain was laying claim to those goods and those ships and those merchants, and we saw that almost as a form of drafting or conscription that America was not happy with and was causing a lot of problems. Jefferson presidency, 1801 to 1809. He did a few critical things for us here. Get back. I keep trying to move myself and advancing my slides. So he founded West Point. Again, General Washington, President Washington's concept of professional military academies. West Point is one of the preeminent ones there. I've had the opportunity to meet and work with several officers that came from West Point. He was responsible for the Louisiana Purchase and the westward expansion, and incorporated into that is the founding of the Army Corps of Engineers in 1802, of which Lewis and Clark were commissioned for their westward experience. That'll be one of your readings we'll talk about a little bit. They get separated from military history a little bit sometimes, but they are very, very critical. Some of the first engineers going out, they mapped the West. They laid the foundation, the road work, critical to our nation as well as our nation's military. So you'll read a little bit about them. We won't spend too much time on them in this video. We purchased that from France in 1803, so now you can see the boundary, what the boundary of America now looked like. So we went from this to this in a very short period of time. And if you'll remember earlier in my class, my talk, 10 to 15 years prior, this was the westward or the western edge of our nation, and this was by a large frontier, and it really still is even at this time. But they are Lewis and Clark basically using St. Louis down in here as a launching pad to move west and map and explore this area, this territory. All right, things are still getting heated with Great Britain. We will watch a longer video I'll link to that talks a little bit more about the War of 1812 and such, and it's going to focus a lot on Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans. So troubles on the trade waters of Europe, and that's one of the big things. And to back up for a second, whenever the American merchants, whenever you deal with the Federalist and Anti-Federalist, I talked about I talked a little bit about the merchants in the Northeast. They were by and large trading with Britain, so there was a lot of economic interest in them keeping peace with Britain. So that's kind of where some of the anti-war sentiment came from. So it's just another layout of the U.S. forts. So Tecumseh's War, 1810 to 1813, basically he was supplemented by British forces through some tactics there, and that kind of helps push America into war. So you add up the problems in the West, you add up the problems on the trade waters over here in the East, and the problems between France and Britain that America is somewhat involved with just due to their relationship. You've got border disputes going on over here. The war hawks refers to Americans that were really pushing for war. Impressment's a better term. I used the term enslavement earlier, or conscription. But those embargoes placed on American trade. But you've got our East Coast in America that's really not wanting to go to war with Britain. These merchants up on the Upper East Coast are wanting to keep that trade flowing smoothly for their own personal financial gain. So the nation's very divided, and there was a very slow burn towards war, but ultimately war is declared with Great Britain. So Madison's war message, basically thousands of American citizens have been torn from their country. That's that impressment or that conscription of the American trade ships. So commerce has been plundered on every sea, and warfare has been renewed by the savages, was his statement there for the Native Americans or Indians on the frontiers. So we had war with the Native Americans here on the frontiers, the trade water problems over in the East, and the American conscription on the seas. So Henry Clay makes a very bold statement there. So on the 18th day of June, 1812, we declared war on Great Britain, citing the seizure of American trade ships as a violation of the neutrality that came out of the earlier treaty after the American Revolution. The impressment of American sailors was also a violation of that, and British aid to Native Americans fighting the American settlers. So you add it all up, we're at war now. So as you look at this map, kind of think about a few things. So this is British controlled up here in Canada. this Shawnee territory here in the northwest, which although Lewis and Clark had explored, this is very much still the frontier. They have British support here on this frontier. Britain's dealing with 7,000 members of its military, about 10,000 militia members, and about 1,000 ships they can draw upon. We're dealing with 7,000 regular members of the Army, about 5,000 new recruits, and our militia is who knows how many there, on only about 20 ships. So the numbers are not in our favor at all. So the British have a couple of options, and we have to, as a nation, our nation has to think of how they're going to defend that. They can move overland across these smaller waterways here, avoiding the Great Lakes by land. They can land somewhere on the East Coast and come in, not unlike their tactics they had to consider during the American Revolution. Big difference here is they had no foothold already in the country to build upon. They could have also considered a naval assault across the Great Lakes, but that was really moving across land would have been a better option here. So the campaign of 1812, we saw conflicts here, here, and here as well. They were dispersed and uncoordinated. So at Fort Malden, we surrendered Detroit. At Van Rensselaer, the militia repulsed the attack. At Dearborn, the militia retreated and fell back. So here we repulsed the attack. We surrendered there at Detroit, and at Dearborn, the militia retreated. So 3 major battles, 3 different outcomes. So that was now in British control because we surrendered that. We fell back up here and repulsed the attack there. So now we had a British stronghold right up here in Detroit. So as we look at 1813, we now go to war on the seas. We are dealing with British assaults and ships all along the eastern seaboard, more attacks along the Canadian frontier, and a British attack up through New Orleans and up through the south here. So we send, let me advance the slide a little bit here. General Jackson, Andrew Jackson, we send him down and to protect and defend this area. And as these battles up here draw to, let me go back on the slide a little bit to throw that graphic up. I'm trying to get that graphic up a little bit better. As these battles up in here kind of draw to a standstill or a stalemate, we look down here, and Britain at this point, as 1813 comes to a close, Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, he's called, and he's going to be the focus of the video about the War of 1812 that I'll put in the class notes. That is, he's sent down there, and basically Britain is fighting at this point. They just want to make it painful for us, and they want to fight to the best possible terms of surrender. We've got Andrew Jackson down in New Orleans. He's been sent down to defend that. Britain is going to try one last attack to make it as painful for the Americans as they can, knowing they're probably going to have to negotiate a treaty, but they want to go into that treaty, those treaty negotiations with as much leverage or power as they possibly can. So that's really their goal. The Battle of New Orleans is actually fought a number of weeks after the treaty had been signed. However, at that point in time, communication was very, very slow. It had to travel by letter, by ship across the ocean. So the war was actually over by the time that battle was fought. So again, I will link to that in the class notes. And the Treaty of Ghent was signed. Let me get back to this. And basically, there was no pre-war territorial boundary changes. So basically, the boundaries stayed the same. We've got the new western area we've purchased from Spain that is still ours. Our American boundaries were still the same. Both nations did agree to start working towards the end of the international slave trade. Wouldn't be fully fulfilled for a number of years. But there was new U.S. and British trade agreements, so that we were able to maintain that trade agreement that salvaged some of that. So really, that's it. Some of the readings will further explain the Lewis and Clark expedition, as well as some of the civil problems and the actual War of 1812. Again, with the focus on the Battle of New Orleans and Old Hickory. So, any questions, feel free to reach out, email me, and thank you very much for taking the time to watch this week's lesson.